Little girl promises miracle of making wheelchair-bound millionaire walk in exchange for job for her dad. But when she tries the miracle, something incredible happens. Rate my story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sound of rain drumming against the windows of the 20th floor echoed through the luxurious office, creating a melancholic melody that accompanied the dark thoughts of the man sitting behind the mahogany desk. At 30 years old, the entrepreneur had amassed an impressive fortune through shrewd investments on Wall Street, building an empire that many envied. His face, which had once graced magazine covers as a symbol of successful young entrepreneurship, now bore a permanent expression of bitterness. The wheelchair in which he had been confined for 5 long years was not just a medical device, but a constant reminder of how life can change in a matter of seconds. The accident that had left him paralyzed from the legs down had stolen more than his mobility. It had taken away his joy, his hope, and his ability to trust the people around him. That Monday morning, as he reviewed financial reports that showed a few more million added to his net worth, the millionaire barely imagined that his routine would be interrupted in such an unexpected way. His secretary had gone out to lunch, leaving him alone with his thoughts and numbers that danced on the spreadsheets, representing stocks that generated astronomical dividends. It was then that he heard a soft noise at the office door. He thought it was the cleaning crew, but the sound was different, delicate, hesitant. When he looked up from the documents, he saw a vision that left him completely bewildered. A tiny girl was standing in the doorway, soaked by the rain that was falling outside. Her dark hair clung to her small face, and her clothes, which seemed to have been too big for her at some point, now hung like wet rags on her fragile little body. What was most impressive was her size. She appeared to be only 2 years old. Such was her frailty, although something in her large, determined eyes suggested a slightly older age. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a voice so low that he had to lean forward to hear. "I need to talk to you about a job." The businessman blinked a few times, trying to process the surreal scene before him. A child, visibly in a situation of extreme vulnerability, had managed to get past the security of the most exclusive commercial building in the city and reach his office on the 20th floor. "How did you get in here?" he asked, still processing the situation. "The lady at the front desk went to the restroom," the girl replied, with a disconcerting sincerity. "I just wanted to talk to you. It's very important." The man looked at the child more closely. Her small hands were trembling, not only from the cold of the rain, but from something that seemed to be a mixture of fear and determination. Her bare feet left small puddles on the expensive carpet, and he noticed small cuts and scratches on her skinny legs. "You shouldn't be here," he said, trying to sound firm, but something in the girl's expression prevented him from being harsher. "Where are your parents?" The child's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back with surprising strength for someone so small. "My daddy's been looking for a job for a long time. He's very smart and knows how to work with numbers, but nobody wants to give him a chance." The businessman felt a strange pang in his chest. There was something in the way she spoke, a precocious maturity that only suffering can teach a child. "And what does that have to do with me?" The girl took a few steps forward, leaving a trail of droplets on the floor. "I heard people saying that you're very important and have a big company. My daddy said you have so much money that you even keep it in Bitcoin." The casual mention of the cryptocurrency surprised him. How did a child of that age know about such investments? "I want to make a deal with you," she continued, now standing right next to his desk. "If you give my daddy a job, I'll make you walk again." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain. The businessman stared at her, trying to decide whether to laugh at the childlike naivete or feel offended by the absurd suggestion. 5 years of physical therapy, experimental treatments, and consultations with the best neurologists in the world had failed to restore movement to his legs, and a child believed she could solve it with a simple deal. "Little one," he said finally, trying to be gentle, "things don't work that way. My condition is permanent. The doctors were very clear about that." "But I can help," she insisted, climbing onto one of the upholstered chairs in front of the desk. "I know I can. You just have to let me try." There was something mesmerizing about the absolute conviction in her voice. The businessman found himself studying every detail of the small face in front of him, the fierce determination that contrasted with the physical fragility, the intelligence that shone in her dark eyes, the upright posture even in the midst of evident fatigue. "What's your father's name?" he asked, more out of curiosity than any real intention to help. The answer that came next hit him like a punch to the stomach, awakening memories that he had tried to bury along with his guilt and regret. The name echoed in the silent office like a ghost from the past, awakening memories that the businessman had tried to bury under piles of documents and stock investments. That man had been one of the brightest employees who had ever worked for his company, a meticulous accountant who possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect irregularities in the most complex numbers. 3 years ago, when his company was still in rapid growth and he trusted the people around him more, the girl's father had worked in the financial department. He was respected by his colleagues, always arrived early and stayed late when necessary. The businessman vaguely remembered conversations in the hallways where the man mentioned his little daughter with evident love in his voice. Then, from one day to the next, everything had changed. Important documents had disappeared, and a significant amount of money had been transferred irregularly from a company account. Suspicion naturally fell on those who had access to the financial systems, and the name of the girl's father was at the top of the list. "I remember him," said the businessman, his voice laden with a tension that the child could not fully understand. "But he doesn't work here anymore." The girl tilted her head, confused. "Why not? He said he worked at a very important company and that he really liked what he did." Guilt hit the businessman like an icy wave. He remembered the morning he had called the accountant into his office, the expression of shock and pain on the man's face when he presented the circumstantial evidence. There was no concrete proof, just a series of coincidences that pointed in his direction. Even so, pressured by his partners and lawyers, he had made the decision to fire him immediately. "Your father—" "There were some problems," explained the businessman, trying to find appropriate words for a child. "Things that adults do that are complicated to explain." "Did he do something wrong?" she asked, her big eyes filling with contained tears. The simple question carried a weight that the businessman was not prepared to face. For 3 years, he had lived with the certainty that he had done the right thing, that he had protected his company from a dishonest employee. But looking at that fragile child, remembering the dedication that the father showed at work, the certainty began to crumble. "I don't know," he finally admitted, a confession that cost more than any financial loss he had ever suffered. The girl slipped off the chair and approached the desk, placing her small hands on the polished surface. "My daddy is a good person. He teaches me to always tell the truth and to help people when we can. He would never do anything to hurt anyone." The absolute conviction in her voice made something move in the businessman's chest, a sensation he had not experienced in years. It was as if a part of himself that had fallen asleep was slowly beginning to awaken. "Where are you living now?" he asked, trying to change the course of the conversation that was becoming too uncomfortable. The girl's face closed slightly, as if she knew that this information could cause more suffering. "In a place where other families also live. There are many beds in just one room, and sometimes there isn't enough food for everyone." The businessman felt his stomach contract. A temporary shelter. The family was living in a shelter, probably sharing space with dozens of other people in a similar situation. The image of the child returning to such a place, wet and without hope, was more than he could bear. "And about this deal you mentioned," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "How exactly do you intend to make me walk?" The girl's eyes lit up with renewed hope. "I'm going to take care of you every day. I'm going to do exercises with your legs. I'm going to talk to them so they remember how they work. I'm going to draw pretty pictures for you and sing songs that my mummy used to sing to me." The innocence of the proposal was both touching and devastating. The businessman had spent a fortune on treatments. His income from financial investments allowed him to afford any experimental procedure in the world, but nothing had worked. And here was a 4-year-old child offering drawings and songs as medicine. "Little one," he began, preparing to explain gently why this was impossible. "I know you don't believe in me," she interrupted him, "but I feel things that other people don't feel. When I touch people, sometimes I can feel where they are hurt inside." She reached out to him but stopped halfway, as if waiting for permission. "Can I touch your hand?" Against all his rational instincts, the businessman extended his left hand. The girl's small, cold fingers touched his, and for a moment he felt something strange, a kind of tingling that he had not experienced in years. "You're very sad inside," she said, her eyes fixed on his. "And your legs are sleeping, but they're not broken forever. They just forgot how to wake up." The businessman withdrew his hand abruptly, disturbed by the inexplicable sensation he had felt. It was impossible, completely without scientific basis, but something had happened in that touch. "Even if I wanted to help your father," he said, trying to regain his composure, "it would be complicated. There are legal issues, problems from the past that would need to be resolved." "But can you try?" she insisted. "Just a little chance. My daddy promises he'll work very hard, and I promise I'll make you walk again." The businessman looked at the wet, determined child, completely convinced that she could accomplish the impossible. He remembered his own childhood, when he still believed that willpower and kindness could overcome any obstacle. That faith had died along with the movement in his legs, but looking at that girl was like seeing a distant reflection of who he had been before becoming just a rich and bitter man. "1 week," he said finally, surprised by his own words. "I'll give your father a 1-week trial, but I want to make it clear that this doesn't mean I believe in miracles." The smile that lit up the girl's face was so pure and radiant that for a moment the office seemed less gloomy, as if someone had turned on a light that had been off for years. 3 weeks had passed since the girl's father had returned to work, and the businessman watched from his office window as he tried to process the changes that seemed to be happening around him. The man he had fired with unfounded suspicions was demonstrating a professional competence that even surpassed his memories of the past. Each financial report arrived impeccable. Each investment analysis revealed insights that had resulted in considerable profits for the company. But what disturbed the businessman most was the girl's daily presence. Promptly at 4 in the afternoon, she appeared in his office carrying small homemade gifts, colored drawings made with crayons found at the shelter, wildflowers picked in the small garden near the building, and always those soft songs that she hummed while sitting on the floor next to his wheelchair. On that particular day, she had arrived with something different, a small sketchbook that she had obtained from a donation from the local church. The pages were filled with naive but touching illustrations, birds flying, people walking hand in hand, and repeatedly the figure of a man rising from a chair. "Today, I brought a new story," she announced, sitting in her usual position on the carpet. "It's about a king who forgot how to use his legs because he spent too much time thinking only about sad things." The businessman sighed, feigning irritation, but secretly looked forward to these moments. In recent weeks, he had noticed something disturbing. His legs reacted strangely during the girl's visits. Small spasms that the doctors had said were impossible, tingling sensations that he had not experienced since the accident. In the story, continued the girl, showing her drawings, the king had a lot of gold and many treasures, but he was always alone in his castle. Until one day, a tiny fairy appeared and said that she could help him, but he needed to learn to believe again. As she spoke, the businessman felt that familiar sensation, a subtle tingling in his right thigh. It was impossible, completely contrary to all the medical diagnoses he had received, but it was happening. The office door opened quietly, and the girl's father entered carrying a folder with reports. The man had lost weight visibly in recent weeks, and the businessman noticed the patched clothes and the tiredness in his eyes. Even so, his work remained impeccable, demonstrating a loyalty and dedication that made the guilt of the past weigh even more heavily on his conscience. "Sorry to interrupt," the father said, hesitating at the entrance. "Can I leave these documents here?" "They're the analyses of the investment in funds that you requested. You can leave them on the desk," replied the businessman, noticing how the man avoided direct eye contact. The tension between them was palpable, a mixture of unresolved resentment and reluctant gratitude. The girl looked between the two men, and with the peculiar intuition of children asked, "Daddy, why do you and Mr. Sobrenome do Empresário usar o mesmo da parte caso tenha sido adaptado? Caso contrário, inventar sobrenome americano always looks so serious when you're together. Can't you be friends?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable. The girl's father lowered his eyes, while the businessman felt the weight of 3 years of misunderstandings and hasty decisions. "Some things are complicated, honey," the father murmured, heading towards the exit. "Wait," said the businessman, surprising himself. "The reports you prepared on asset diversification were exceptional. Where did you learn about the cryptocurrency market?" The man stopped, turning slowly. "I studied on my own during these 3 years. I had a lot of free time to research investments and financial trends." The subtle bitterness in his voice did not go unnoticed. 3 years of unemployment, living on odd jobs, struggling to support a young daughter in a shelter. The businessman felt his stomach clench with guilt. "Daddy's very smart," the girl chimed in proudly. "He knows all about money and numbers. At the shelter, he helps other people understand their bills and important papers." At that moment, something unexpected happened. The businessman tried to adjust himself in the wheelchair and felt something that left him completely paralyzed with surprise. He had voluntarily moved his right foot. It was almost imperceptible, but it had definitely happened. The shock must have shown on his face, because both the father and the girl looked at him with concern. "Is everything all right?" asked the man, taking a step towards the desk. The businessman looked at his right leg, trying to repeat the movement. Nothing happened. Maybe it had been imagination, an involuntary spasm that he had mistaken for conscious movement. Yes, everything's fine," he murmured, but his mind was in turmoil. The girl got up from the floor and approached his chair. "Can I touch your leg today? Sometimes when I touch, I can feel if things are getting better." Against all logic, the businessman nodded. The child's small, warm hand landed gently on his thigh, and again he felt that strange tingling, as if something dormant was trying to awaken. "It's better," she said with absolute conviction. "I can feel that it's less sad inside too." The girl's father watched the scene with a complex expression, part skepticism, part hope, and something that seemed to be recognition that his daughter possessed a special sensitivity that he could not fully explain. That night, after the father and daughter had left, the businessman remained in his office until very late, reviewing financial reports and trying to process the strange events of the day. His investments were generating exceptional returns. His company had a competent accountant who was proving valuable, and something inexplicable seemed to be happening with his medical condition. Even more disturbing was the gradual realization that he had made a terrible mistake 3 years ago. The evidence that seemed so convincing at the time now proved to be circumstantial and inadequate. He had ruined the life of an innocent man and indirectly caused suffering to a child who deserved nothing but care and protection. When he finally decided to go home, the businessman did something he had not done in years. He picked up his cell phone and scheduled an appointment with the neurologist. He needed to understand if the symptoms he was experiencing had any real medical basis, or if he was simply creating hopes where there should be none. What he did not know was that at that very moment, in the temporary shelter where they lived, the girl was drawing another of her optimistic figures, a man rising from a chair, this time with a smile on his face, while a little girl applauded beside him. 6 months had passed since that rainy morning that had changed everything, and the businessman found himself in a medical examination room that cost more per hour than many people earned in a year. Dr. Martinez, the most renowned neurologist in the country, studied the test results with an expression of perplexity that he rarely demonstrated in his 40 years of career. "The results are unusual," said the doctor, adjusting his glasses as he compared the current images with those from 5 years ago. "There are clear signs of neuronal regeneration in areas that we considered permanently damaged. This should not be possible with your specific injury." The businessman felt his heart pounding in his chest. For months, he had experienced increasingly noticeable movements in his legs, always coinciding with the girl's daily visits. What had started as subtle tingling had evolved into controllable spasms, and in recent weeks, genuine voluntary movements of his toes. "What does this mean exactly?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "It means that we need to completely rethink your prognosis," replied Dr. Martinez. "There are rare cases in the medical literature of late neurological recovery, but they generally involve injuries different from yours. Have you changed anything in your routine? New treatment, experimental physical therapy, dietary changes?" The businessman hesitated. How to explain that the most significant change in his life had been the daily presence of a 4-year-old child who believed she could cure him through drawings, songs, and an unwavering faith? How to admit that he had begun to look forward anxiously to the afternoons, when she appeared with her naive stories and her gentle touch that seemed to awaken something dormant in his body. "I have a little friend who visits me every day," he said finally. "She does a kind of therapeutic companionship." Dr. Martinez nodded, probably interpreting this as some kind of animal-assisted therapy or hospital volunteer program. Emotional support can have significant impacts on neurological recovery. The human brain is still a mystery in many respects. That afternoon, when the girl arrived at the office carrying a small vase with a plant that she had found, the businessman looked at her with completely different eyes. She did not know the test results, did not understand the magnitude of what was apparently happening, but continued her daily routine with the same innocent dedication as always. "Today I brought a little plant for you," she announced, placing the improvised vase on the desk. "It was very sad on the street, so I brought it here for you to take care of it with me." The businessman observed the plant, a small fern that had clearly been rescued from some abandoned flower bed. It was fragile, with yellowish leaves, but there was something touching in the girl's concern for another living being that was struggling to survive. "How did you know I like plants?" he asked, despite not remembering having mentioned this. "I know many things about you," she replied simply, sitting on the floor next to his chair. "I know that you get sad when you think about your brother. I know that you miss having a family, and I know that your legs are almost ready to remember how to walk." The businessman froze. She had mentioned his brother, something about which he had never spoken to anyone in the company, not even to her father. The complicated relationship with his younger brother was a wound that he kept completely private. "What do you know about my brother?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. The girl tilted her head as if she were listening to something that only she could hear. "He makes you feel very hurt inside, more hurt even than your legs." But he's not a bad person, he's just very afraid. The child's words hit the businessman like a punch to the stomach. His brother had completely distanced himself after the accident, claiming he couldn't handle the situation. The two had argued terribly in their last conversation 5 years ago, when the businessman was still in the hospital. Since then, they had not exchanged a single word. "How do you know these things?" he whispered. "I feel when people are hurt," she explained, touching his hand gently. "Daddy says it's a special gift, but that I should use it to help, never to hurt." At that moment, the door opened, and the girl's father entered. But this time his expression was different. There was something urgent in his eyes, a mixture of fear and determination that left the businessman immediately alert. "I need to talk to you," said the man, looking significantly at his daughter. "It's about irregularities I found in the old accounting books." The businessman felt his blood run cold. "What kind of irregularities?" "The transfers that resulted in my dismissal 3 years ago," replied the girl's father, placing a thick folder on the desk. "I found evidence that they were made remotely, using access codes that were not mine." The silence that followed was tense. The businessman opened the folder and began to examine the documents, his expression growing increasingly somber as he read. "You're saying that someone used your credentials to make the transfers?" he asked. "Exactly. And there's something else." The man hesitated, looking at his daughter, who was watching everything with big, worried eyes. "The system logs show that the accesses were made from a specific computer, a computer that was registered in your brother's name." The businessman felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. His brother. The same brother who had insisted on the accountant's immediate dismissal, who had pushed for a quick and conclusive investigation, who had distanced himself soon after the accident, in circumstances that now seemed extremely suspicious. The girl got up and approached his chair, placing her small hand on his arm. "Don't be sad," she said softly. "Sometimes people do bad things because they're very afraid or hurt inside. But it's always possible to fix things if everyone wants to try." At that moment, as if the universe were orchestrating a dramatic revelation, the businessman's cell phone rang. The name on the screen made his heart stop. It was his brother, calling after 5 years of total silence. With trembling hands, he answered the call, putting it on speakerphone without fully thinking through the consequences. "I know you found out," said the familiar voice on the other end of the line, laden with a mixture of despair and relief. "And I know you probably hate me now more than ever, but I need to tell you the truth about the accident, about everything that happened. I can't live with this weight anymore. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10. And thank you very much.